The global obesity crisis, it's, it's huge, right? I mean, the sheer number of people struggling with it is just staggering. And finding truly effective treatments has been, a real challenge, to say the least.
It is a massive problem, no question. And when you look at the limitations of current treatments, it really underscores the need for new approaches. That's where a company like Arrowhead Pharmaceuticals comes in.
Yeah.
And they're doing some really interesting work with RNA interference, or RNAi.
RNAi. Okay, so for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you give us a quick, RNAi for dummies explanation?
For sure. Think of RNAi like a silencing mechanism, a way to essentially turn off specific genes that are involved in disease. Arrowhead has developed a really impressive platform for harnessing this technology, particularly in the realm of metabolic diseases like, you guessed it, obesity.
So they're basically targeting the root cause of some of these conditions at the genetic level? That's pretty amazing.
Precisely. And they've got these two investigational drugs, ARO-INHBE and ARO-ALK7, that we're going to really dive into today.
All right, so that's our mission then, to kind of unpack these two potential game changers, figure out how they work, what makes them unique, and the kind of impact they could have on, for people looking for better obesity treatment.
Exactly. And there's a lot to unpack, so let's jump right in.
Let's do it. So first up, ARO-INHBE. What's the elevator pitch for this one?
ARO-INHBE targets the INHBE gene in the liver. It's all about reducing the production of this signaling molecule called activin E.
Activin E, got it. So what's so important about this activin E? Why are we trying to, silence it?
Activin E basically tells your body to store fat, to hold on to it, to prevent it from being broken down. It's like the fat storage signal. It travels from the liver to your fat tissue, and it interacts with this receptor called ALK7 and basically says, hey, keep storing fat, don't break it down.
So ARO-INHBE is like stepping in and saying, nope, not today, activin E. We're going to cut you off at the source.
Exactly. By reducing active V production, you're aiming to disrupt that whole fat-storing, fat breakdown-blocking pathway. And the hope is you get increased fat burning, healthier fat cells, less of that harmful visceral fat, and improved insulin sensitivity as well.
Wow. Okay, so that all sounds great in theory, but do we have any, actual evidence that this might actually work?
Yeah, actually we do. There have been some really promising studies in mice, specifically diet-induced obese mice. Basically, they made the mice obese through their diet, and then they tested the effects of silencing the INHBE gene.
And what did they find?
Pretty remarkable results, actually. They saw a 19% suppression in body weight gain, which is already impressive. But more importantly, they found a 22% reduction in fat mass. And here's the kicker. They maintained their lean muscle.
That's huge. I mean, we know that a lot of weight loss treatments can lead to muscle loss, which is not what you want. So maintaining lean muscle is a big deal. Any other encouraging signs in those studies?
Yeah. They also noticed a trend towards better blood sugar control, which is obviously super important, especially given the link between obesity and type 2 diabetes. And there's this other interesting finding. ARO-INHBE seemed to increase the mice's sensitivity to their own fat-burning hormones without causing any fatty liver disease.
Okay, so the preclinical data, the stuff done in animals, sounds pretty good, but how do we know if this will actually translate to humans? I mean, mice aren't people.
That's a great question, and that's where human genetics comes in. Studies have actually shown that people who naturally have variations in the INHBE gene, variations that reduce its function, tend to have a healthier fat distribution and are less likely to develop metabolic diseases.
Oh, so it's like their bodies are already doing what ARO-INHBE is trying to do.
Right, exactly. So this genetic link really strengthens the case for targeting this pathway with a drug like ARO-INHBE. It suggests that what we're seeing in mice could very well apply to humans.
That makes a lot of sense. So where are we at with ARO-INHBE in terms of the drug development process? Where does it stand right now?
Right now, ARO-INHBE is in a phase 12A clinical trial. It's still early days, but this is where we start to see if it's safe and get those first hints that it might actually work in humans.
And what does that trial actually look like? I mean, what are they doing?
So it's called ARO-INHBE 1001, and it actually started dosing patients back in December of 2024 in New Zealand.
New Zealand, interesting. Why New Zealand?
It's not uncommon for clinical trials to be conducted in multiple countries. Different countries have different regulations and patient populations, and it helps to get a broader picture of how a drug works.
Got it. Okay, so back to the trial itself.
Right, so it's a dose-escalating study. They start with small doses to make sure it's safe and gradually increase the dose to find the optimal level.
Okay.
They've enrolled up to 78 adults who have obesity, some with type 2 diabetes and some without. And the trial has two parts.
Two parts. What are those?
The first part looks at ARO-INHBE as a standalone therapy. So they're just giving ARO-INHBE by itself to see how well it works. The second part of the trial is testing ARO-INHBE in combination with tirzepatide, which is a really effective GLP-1 and GIP agonist that's already on the market.
So they're exploring both solo and team-up options, which makes sense, right? I mean, if it works well on its own, that's great. But if it can boost the effectiveness of existing treatments, that's a whole other level of game changer.
Exactly. And it's a smart strategy because combination therapies are becoming increasingly important in obesity treatment. They can offer greater weight loss and address multiple aspects of the disease.
So when do we get to see the results? When is the big reveal?
Well, they're anticipating some initial data by the end of 2025, so we'll have to wait a bit longer. And the whole study is expected to be finished around January of 2026.
Okay, so we'll be sure to keep our listeners updated on that. Now, stepping back for a moment, who is Arrowhead targeting with ARO-INHBE? Is it for, like, everyone with obesity or a specific subset of patients?
Their main focus is on adults with obesity, and that includes those who also have type 2 diabetes. Given how closely these two conditions are linked, a treatment that could address both would be a huge win.
Makes sense. Now, I'm curious, are there other companies also working on drugs that target the same pathway, the INHBE pathway? Are there other players in this game?
There are a few. Wave Life Sciences is developing a similar RNAi drug called WVE-007, which is expected to enter phase 1 trials in early 2025.
So they're a direct competitor?
Yep, they're right on their heels.
Yep.
And Arrowhead Pharmaceuticals, another big player in the RNAi space, has also been doing research on the INHBE gene. They've found links between mutations in this gene and protection against abdominal obesity and metabolic syndrome, so they could potentially become a competitor down the road as well.
So it's getting a little crowded in the INHBE lane, but we also need to consider the bigger picture, right? I mean, the obesity treatment market is a pretty competitive landscape in general. There are lots of drugs out there already.
It's incredibly competitive. You've got the GLP-1 receptor agonists, drugs like semaglutide and tirzepatide. They've been extremely successful. People are losing significant weight on these medications, and they're really setting a high bar for any new treatment coming into the market.
So where does that leave ARO-INHBE? How can it stand out in such a crowded field? Does it have any, like, secret weapons or special advantages?
It does have a few things going for it. First of all, the fact that it targets a pathway with such strong genetic validation is huge. We know that variations in the INHBE gene are linked to real differences in human health. That gives us a lot of confidence that this is a pathway worth targeting.
Right, so it's not just like a random guess. They're going after a target that we know is important.
Exactly. And then there's the whole lean muscle mass thing. If ARO-INHBE can consistently preserve or even increase lean muscle mass in humans, that would be a major differentiator because, as we said before, muscle loss is a big problem with many weight loss treatments.
Yeah, it can really sabotage your long-term metabolic health. So preserving muscle is crucial.
Absolutely. And then there's the potential for improved blood sugar control. And the fact that it could be used in combination with existing GLP-1 agonists is also really exciting. Imagine being able to combine ARO-INHBE with something like tirzepatide and potentially see even greater weight loss and metabolic benefits.
That would be amazing. And as an RNAi therapy, it could potentially offer the benefit of less frequent dosing, right?
That's the hope. One of the big advantages of RNAi is that you can potentially get long-lasting effects from a single treatment. So instead of taking a pill every day, you might be able to get an injection once a month or even less often. That would be a major improvement in terms of convenience and adherence.
That would be huge for patients, but we have to be realistic, right? I mean, there are always challenges in drug development. What are some of the potential hurdles that ARO-INHBE might face?
Well, the biggest one is that it's still early in the clinical development process. We have promising preclinical data, but we need to see how it performs in larger, longer-term trials in humans. Safety is always a top priority, and we need to make sure that ARO-INHBE is well tolerated over time. And then there's the whole issue of competition. The obesity treatment market is fierce, and ARO-INHBE will have to prove that it can offer something unique and valuable that sets it apart from the pack.
Right. It can't just be like another weight loss drug. It has to offer something special. And what about those RNAi-specific challenges we talked about earlier? Are those still a concern?
They are. Targeted delivery is always a challenge with RNAi therapies. You have to get those RNA molecules to the right cells, the liver cells in this case, without causing any problems along the way. And then there's the potential for off-target effects. You don't want to accidentally silence genes that you're not targeting. and the possibility of triggering immune responses is always a concern with RNAi.
So Arrowhead has to make sure that ARO-INHBE is hitting its target accurately and safely while avoiding any collateral damage, basically.
Exactly. And they're using their proprietary TRIME platform to try to address those challenges. It's a delivery system that's designed to enhance the precision and safety of their RNAi therapies.
So assuming everything goes well in the trials, what happens next? I mean, what kind of practical challenges will Arrowhead face in actually bringing ARO-INHBE to market?
Well, first and foremost, they'll need to get regulatory approval. That means convincing the FDA or other regulatory agencies around the world that ARO-INHBE is both safe and effective for treating obesity. And that requires a lot of data from well-designed and well-conducted clinical trials. And then there's the whole issue of manufacturing. They'll need to be able to produce large quantities of ARO-INHBE consistently and at a reasonable cost.
Right, because it doesn't matter how great a drug is if you can't actually produce it and make it available to patients.
Exactly. And then there's the whole world of market access and reimbursement. They have to convince insurance companies to cover the cost of ARO-INHBE. And that can be a real challenge, especially with so many other weight loss treatments already on the market.
And of course, they'll be competing with those big pharmaceutical companies with their massive marketing budgets.
That's a huge hurdle for any smaller biotech company. They have to figure out how to make ARO-INHBE stand out in a very noisy and crowded market.
It's a tough road, no doubt, but the potential rewards are huge if they can pull it off.
What are the experts saying about ARO-INHBE's prospects? Are they optimistic?
It's a mixed bag. Some analysts are cautiously optimistic, highlighting the potential for lean muscle preservation as a key differentiator for ARO-INHBE. And the overall obesity therapeutics market is massive, with projected sales exceeding $100 billion. So if ARO-INHBE is successful, it could be a major financial win for Arrowhead.
I mean, those are the kinds of numbers that make investors drool. Absolutely. But there are also analysts who are more hesitant. They acknowledge the early-stage nature of the research and the inherent risks involved, and they point to the intense competition in the obesity treatment market.
So it's a high-risk, high-reward situation, but that's kind of par for the course in the biotech world, isn't it?
It absolutely is. But here's the thing. ARO-INHBE aligns perfectly with Arrowhead's overall research strategy. They're laser-focused on using RNAi to tackle cardiometabolic diseases, and this drug is a prime example of that.
It's like their bread and butter. Definitely.
Yeah. They're leveraging their expertise in RNAi technology and their proprietary TRIM delivery system. They've chosen a target with really strong genetic validation, which increases the odds of success. And their decision to evaluate ARO-INHBE both as a standalone therapy and in combination with tirzepatide shows that they're thinking strategically about how to position this drug in the market. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket, which is smart. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground on ARO-INHBE. Let's switch gears now and talk about Arrowhead's other obesity drug candidate, ARO-ALK7. What's the deal with this one?
So ARO-ALK7 takes a different approach, but ultimately aims to achieve the same goal. It targets the ACVR1C gene, and its action takes place directly in the adipocytes, the fat cells themselves. The goal is to reduce the production of the ALK7 receptor.
Wait. ALK7, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, we talked about ALK7 earlier as the receptor that activin E binds to. Now, with ARO-ALK7, we're going straight to the receptor in the fat cells.
I see. So what's the crucial role of this ALK7 in fat cells?
ALK7 plays a crucial role in regulating energy balance, lipid metabolism, and the overall amount of fat within adipose tissue. It basically controls how fat cells function and grow. By reducing ALK7, the hope is to shrink fat cells and improve metabolic health.
So by reducing ALK7, what's the desired outcome? Less fat, obviously, but how exactly? The primary goal is to reduce visceral fat, the kind of fat that accumulates around organs and is linked to a whole bunch of health problems. They also want to improve lipid and blood sugar levels. Preclinical studies in rodents and non-human primates have shown that ARO-ALK7 effectively reduces ALK7 mRNA specifically in adipose tissue, and it does so in a dose-dependent and durable manner.
Okay, so it seems to work as intended in those preclinical models, but what about the actual impact on fat and weight?
The results in diet-induced obese mice were quite impressive. Silencing ALK7 led to a whopping 50% reduction in fat mass, which is significant by any measure. And like with ARO-INHBE, they also observed preservation of lean muscle mass.
50%, wow, that's remarkable.
Right.
So how did they manage to achieve that? Was it by reducing appetite?
Interestingly, no. It seems like the mechanism of action is primarily through increased energy expenditure and lipolysis, which means they're burning more fat without any changes in food intake. So it's directly targeting fat metabolism, not appetite.
So this is different from many other weight loss drugs that focus on making you feel less hungry. What about its potential as a combination therapy? Was it tested alongside other drugs, like tirzepatide, for example?
Absolutely. And the results were particularly interesting. When ARO-ALK7 was combined with tirzepatide, they observed additive effects on both weight and fat loss. In other words, the combination was more effective than either drug alone. What's even more encouraging is that the combination seemed to mitigate the lean muscle mass loss sometimes associated with tirzepatide alone.
So it's not only more effective at reducing fat and weight, but it also potentially helps preserve muscle mass when used in combination with tirzepatide. That's a huge plus. And similar to INHBE, is there a genetic basis for targeting ALK7?
Yes, there is. Loss of function variants in the ALK7 gene in humans have been associated with better body composition, protection from type 2 diabetes, and a lower risk of cardiovascular disease. This genetic validation provides strong support for the idea that targeting ALK7 could be a viable therapeutic strategy for obesity and related metabolic disorders.
Okay, so the preclinical data for ARO-ALK7 looks very promising. What's the current status of its clinical development?
Arrowhead has recently received regulatory clearance in New Zealand to start a phase 12A trial for ARO-ALK7, which they've named ARO-ALK7 1001. They're expecting to start dosing participants in the second quarter of 2025.
So it's a bit behind ARO-INHBE in terms of clinical development. What will this trial entail?
Like the ARO-INHBE trial, it's a first-in-human dose-escalating trial, this time rolling up to 90 adult volunteers with obesity. It will also have two parts. The first part will assess ARO-ALK7 as a monotherapy, while the second part will evaluate its efficacy and safety in combination with tirzepatide. The second part will also include obese patients with and without type 2 diabetes, allowing them to assess its effectiveness across a broader patient population.
When can we expect to see some initial data from this trial?
They anticipate having initial data from the single ascending dose portion of the study by the end of 2025. Yeah, so potentially around the same time as the initial ARO-INHBE data.
So both trials are on a similar timeline in terms of early data releases. It'll be fascinating to see what they find. Now, regarding ARO-ALK7's target patient group, is it the same as ARO-INHBE?
Yes, the primary target group is adults with obesity. And just like with ARO-INHBE, the second part of the study will include individuals with or without type 2 diabetes, so they're casting a wide net in terms of patient population.
What about competition? Are there any other drugs out there specifically targeting ALK7?
Interestingly, ARO-ALK7 seems to be the only drug in clinical development that's specifically targeting ALK7. This gives it a potential first-mover advantage in a market that's hungry for novel therapies.
That's a significant advantage. But of course, it's still operating within the larger obesity market, which means it will inevitably face competition from those already established GLP-1 receptor agonists.
Absolutely. It won't be a walk in the park, even with its unique mechanism of action. There's also some interesting preclinical research suggesting that the metabolic responses observed with ALK7 mutations in mice are similar to those seen with beta-3 adrenoceptor agonists, another class of anti-obesity drugs. So while it might not have direct competitors targeting ALK7, it might face indirect competition from drugs that produce similar effects through different pathways.
So ARO-ALK7 has the potential to be a first-in-class therapy targeting ALK7. What other potential advantages could it offer?
Well, its novel mechanism of action, focusing on increasing energy expenditure and fat burning without directly suppressing appetite, is a major plus. This could potentially translate to fewer of those unpleasant gastrointestinal side effects that are sometimes associated with GLP-1 receptor agonists. The significant fat loss and lean mass preservation observed in the preclinical studies are also incredibly encouraging. And the potential for additive benefits and mitigation of lean mass loss when combined with tirzepatide is incredibly exciting.
It sounds like ARO-ALK7 might have a leg up on some of the existing treatments, especially in terms of minimizing those undesirable side effects. And of course, it shares the potential benefit of less frequent dosing as an RNA therapy, just like ARO-INHBE. But what about the potential drawbacks or challenges?
Similar to ARO-INHBE, being in early clinical development means there are inherent risks. We need to see how it performs in human trials before getting too excited. It also faces stiff competition from those established therapies that have already demonstrated significant efficacy. The challenges associated with RNAi therapeutics, such as targeted delivery to adipose tissue, the potential for off-target effects, and immunogenicity concerns, are still relevant, even with Arrowhead's sophisticated TRiM platform.
It seems like those RNAi-related challenges are a recurring theme. It'll be interesting to see how Arrowhead continues to address them as they move forward with both ARO-INHBE and ARO-ALK7.
Absolutely. Another potential challenge is that the weight loss observed with ARO-ALK7 as a monotherapy in preclinical studies, while significant, wasn't quite as dramatic as some of the leading GLP-1 agonists. This suggests that combination therapy might be the key to achieving truly optimal efficacy.
So it might not be a solo superstar, but could be a valuable team player.
Precisely. And let's not forget the usual suspects when it comes to drug development and commercialization challenges. Successfully completing those clinical trials, obtaining regulatory approval, ensuring long-term safety, scaling up manufacturing, securing market access and reimbursement, and effectively competing with those pharmaceutical giants will all be critical hurdles to overcome.
It sounds like they have their work cut out for them. What are the experts saying about ARO-ALK7's potential?
It's a bit early for definitive pronouncements, but there's definitely a lot of interest. One biotech analyst has adopted a neutral but curious stance, acknowledging ARO-ALK7's potential as a key player in Arrowhead's pipeline and the broader obesity treatment landscape. They've highlighted those impressive preclinical data and the potential for synergy with incretin therapies like tirzepatide.
So they're intrigued but not quite ready to go all in just yet. What about other perspectives?
Well, a market research analyst has taken a more bullish view, seeing ARO-ALK7 as a potential game changer that could significantly strengthen Arrowhead's position in the rapidly growing obesity market. And of course, the sheer size and growth potential of that market is a major factor driving investor interest and excitement.
That's always a big consideration. It's one thing to have a promising drug, but it's another thing to have a market that's large enough to make it a commercial success.
Exactly. And Zacks Investment Research has also flagged ARO-ALK7 as an early-stage program to watch, so it's definitely on their radar.
So a lot of eyes are on ARO-ALK7, and for good reason. It seems like Arrowhead is onto something potentially big here.
They definitely have the potential to disrupt the obesity treatment market with both ARO-INHBE and ARO-ALK7, but it's a long road from promising preclinical data to a commercially successful drug. We'll have to wait and see how those clinical trials pan out.
Okay, so we've taken a deep dive into both ARO-INHBE and ARO-ALK7. Can we do a quick side-by-side comparison to really highlight the key differences between these two drugs?
Sure, let's break it down. The most fundamental difference is in their targets and where they primarily act in the body. ARO-INHBE goes after the INHBE gene in the liver, and by reducing activin E, it indirectly influences fat tissue. ARO-ALK7, on the other hand, directly targets the ACVR1C gene in the adipocytes, those fat cells themselves, to reduce the ALK7 receptor.
So one's working behind the scenes in the liver, while the other is going straight to the front lines in the fat cells. What about those preclinical results? Were there any noticeable differences in terms of weight and fat loss?
Yes. In the mouse models, ARO-ALK7 actually demonstrated a more pronounced effect. It led to a 39% suppression in weight gain compared to 19% with ARO-INHBE and a 50% reduction in fat mass compared to 22%. Both drugs showed preservation of lean mass, and ARO-ALK7 even demonstrated an increase in lean mass when combined with tirzepatide in those preclinical studies.
So ARO-ALK7 seems to pack a bit more punch, at least in those animal models. Anything else worth noting in terms of their differences?
Well, in terms of their clinical development timelines, ARO-INHBE is slightly ahead. It started dosing in its phase 12A trial back in December 2024, while ARO-ALK7 is expected to begin its phase 12A trial in the second quarter of 2025. However, both are being evaluated in combination with tirzepatide in the second part of their respective trials.
So different targets, different magnitudes of effect in those preclinical models, and slightly different timelines, but both are RNAi therapies being explored as both standalone and combination treatments.
Precisely. And it's also worth noting that because they primarily target different tissues, liver versus adipose tissue, they might have different safety profiles and could potentially be administered differently in the future.
That makes sense. Different parts of the body, different potential side effects, and maybe even different ways of delivering the drug. Now, let's zoom out and talk about the bigger picture here. We've discussed these two specific drugs, but what's the overall state of the obesity treatment landscape? What kind of world are these drugs entering into?
We started this conversation by talking about the global obesity epidemic, and it really can't be overstated how significant of a health problem this is. It's not just about weight. It's about the increased risk of a whole host of other diseases like heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, certain types of cancer, you name it.
And this epidemic is fueling a massive market for obesity treatments, right?
It absolutely is. The global obesity therapeutics market is huge and growing rapidly, with projections of it exceeding $100 billion in the coming years. There's a huge demand for safe and effective treatments, and companies like Arrowhead are racing to develop the next generation of therapies.
And right now, as we mentioned earlier, the GLP-1 receptor agonists are kind of the stars of the show, right? Drugs like semaglutide and tirzepatide are really changing the game.
They're incredibly effective, and they've set a high bar for any new treatment entering the market. They're also generating billions of dollars in sales, which is attracting a lot of attention and investment.
So ARO-INHBE and ARO-ALK7 have some tough competition to contend with.
They do. But they also have the potential to offer something different, something unique. Their distinct mechanisms of action, their potential for preserving lean muscle mass, and their possible use in combination with GLP-1 agonists could give them an edge.
So it's a challenging but potentially very rewarding market for companies developing new obesity treatments. Now, let's talk a bit more about the technology behind ARO-INHBE and ARO-ALK7, RNAi therapeutics. Can you explain in a bit more detail why this approach is so compelling?
Sure. RNAi is a really elegant way to control gene expression. Essentially, you're using these small RNA molecules to target specific genes and prevent them from producing the proteins they code for. It's like a highly targeted off switch for genes that are causing problems.
Yeah.
And what makes it so exciting is that it opens up the possibility of targeting genes that were previously considered undruggable with traditional drug development approaches.
Feels like we're finally able to go after these disease-causing genes that we couldn't touch before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in the context of obesity, this is a game changer. We're now able to go after specific genes involved in fat storage, fat burning, energy balance, and a whole range of other processes that contribute to this complex disease.
And you mentioned earlier that one of the key advantages of RNAi is the potential for long-lasting effects, right?
That's right. Because RNAi actually targets the underlying genetic code, it can potentially lead to sustained reductions in the production of those disease-causing proteins. So instead of taking a pill every day, patients might be able to get a single injection that lasts for weeks or even months.
That would be huge for patients. It would make managing their conditions so much easier. But we also have to acknowledge that RNAi therapies aren't without their challenges, right? You mentioned some of them earlier, like targeted delivery, off-target effects, and immune responses.
Those are definitely challenges that researchers are actively working to overcome. Delivering those RNAi molecules to the right cells without causing any unwanted side effects is a major hurdle. And there's always the risk of accidentally silencing genes that you didn't intend to target or triggering an immune response.
So it's a powerful technology, but it's not a magic bullet. It requires a lot of careful design and testing to make sure it's both safe and effective.
Absolutely. And companies like Arrowhead are investing heavily in developing better delivery systems and refining their RNAi molecules to minimize those risks. They've made significant progress with their proprietary TIM platform, which is designed to enhance both the precision and safety of their RNAi therapies.
It sounds like they're really pushing the boundaries of what's possible with RNAi. And it's exciting to think about the potential of this technology, not just for obesity, but for a whole range of other diseases as well.
It really is. RNAi has the potential to revolutionize how we treat disease, and companies like Arrowhead are leading the charge.
Well, this has been an incredibly informative and engaging deep dive into Arrowhead Pharmaceuticals and their two obesity drug candidates, ARO-INHBE and ARO-ALK7. They both represent novel RNAi-based approaches with the potential to significantly impact the obesity treatment landscape.
It's been a pleasure discussing these exciting new developments with you. The preclinical data for both drugs are very promising, and their potential to achieve significant fat loss while preserving or even enhancing lean muscle mass is a major differentiator in a market where many weight loss treatments often lead to muscle loss as well.
And their focus on targeting specific genes involved in fat metabolism, coupled with their exploration of combination therapies with existing GLP-1 agonists, shows a sophisticated understanding of the complex nature of obesity and a strategic approach to developing effective treatments.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for all of you listening out there, consider this. Do these targeted RNAi approaches, with their focus on specific genes and tissues, represent a shift towards a more personalized approach to treating complex conditions like obesity? Could we be on the cusp of a future where treatments are tailored to our individual genetic and metabolic profiles, moving beyond those more general systemic therapies?
We'll certainly be following their progress closely and keeping our listeners updated on any new developments. And as we wrap up this deep dive, it's worth leaving our listeners with a thought-provoking question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for all of you listening out there, consider this. Do these targeted RNAi approaches, with their focus on specific genes and tissues, represent a shift towards a more personalized approach to treating complex conditions like obesity? Could we be on the cusp of a future where treatments are tailored to our individual genetic and metabolic profiles, moving beyond those more general systemic therapies?
It's a fascinating question to ponder as we continue to explore the potential of RNAi and witness the emergence of these innovative new treatments. We encourage you to stay informed and engaged as this field continues to evolve.
And who knows? Maybe one day, these RNAi-based therapies will be the key to unlocking a healthier future for millions of people struggling with obesity and related metabolic disorders.